You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 88 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I received what I think it was a joke, but it was an interesting question slash suggestion for an episode, and it was to do an episode based off the things I like about LeBron James. Now, I'm often accused of being a LeBron hater, which is fine. I've said it many times before. I'm not going to lose sleep over that accusation because I know it's not true. So even though I thought the suggestion was a joke, I figured this is a good opportunity to talk about the things I actually appreciate about LeBron James, a basketball player. So let's get into it. And number one is that he loses a lot. I'm kidding. Look, relax. Stop writing me an email or a message in all caps. It was a joke. Okay, let's start again. Number one, early on, he seemed to have a genuine passion for the game of basketball. Those early Cavs teams were fun to watch because of LeBron. And dare I say it, back then he made his teammates better. He made Carlos Boozer look like $1 million. Boobie Gibson looked like BJ Armstrong. Mo Williams became an all-star. Cleveland wasn't overly successful, but man, they were fun to watch. Now, of course, this leads me to the second point. Number two, the 2007 playoff run. You know, when we look back at missed opportunities for playoff matchups, especially individual playoff matchups, one of the top three is Kobe versus LeBron. But people forget how close we were to seeing Wade in his prime versus a young LeBron James in the playoffs of 2006, not even the 2007 one. We'll get to that in a second. The Cavs had finally made the postseason with LeBron, and James was spectacular with his play and crab dribbles, if you remember that, against the Wizard in the first round. Then in the second round, against the 67-win Pistons, the Cavs actually had a 3-2 series lead before going down in 7 games. Had they had won, they would have faced Wade and Alonzo and Shaq in the conference finals. And that's a series we all wanted to see. Instead, we saw Miami take out Detroit and then move on to claim the title. The next season, though, the Cavs cruised into the conference finals after beating two 41-win teams in the Nets and the Wizards, before going down 0-2 to the Pistons, who were without Ben Wallace. The Cavs came back to tie the series before LeBron dropped 47 points, or was it 48 or 49? Look, the fact that I can't remember the numbers specifically is not a sign of disrespect. Rather than this was all about the eye test. Were those Pistons on their last legs? Absolutely. But 29 of his team's last 30 points is absolutely insane. And it was one of those games that you just shake your head at. It was just that good. Even looking back at it, I'm still shaking my head when I'm recalling it. The stage was set for him to surpass even what Wade did the season prior, but his play against the Spurs crushed that. But the conversation was created, and it was planted inside our minds. How sweet would it be if we saw Dwayne Wade versus LeBron in the NBA playoffs? And that, to me, is the biggest what if from an individual standpoint, like a realistic one, because obviously we won't see Magic versus LeBron or Jordan versus LeBron. But a realistic one, it's even bigger than Kobe versus LeBron. Then the very next season, in the playoffs, it was his performance against the Celtics. Games 1 and 2 were amongst the worst playoff games of James's career, which is saying something when you look at what happened during the 2011 NBA Finals. Game 1 was horrific. LeBron scored 12 points of 2 of 18 shooting, and he had 10 turnovers. What made matters worse, if that's possible, is the fact that the Cavs only lost by 4 points. Game 2 wasn't that much better either, as he contributed with 21 points of 6 of 24 shooting with 7 turnovers. In the first 2 games, he had 17 turnovers and only 8 made shots. Now, why am I bringing this up? It's purely for context, because Cleveland bounced back to force a Game 7. And when they did, LeBron was emphatic. He carried the Cavs to win within a whisker of taking out the last truly great defensive team that we've seen in the NBA. In Game 7, LeBron poured in 45 points on 14 of 29 shooting. along with 6 assists and 5 steals. Paul Pierce did his best to offset this with 41 points, and the two of them provided the greatest duel in playoff history outside of Shaq and Iverson in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Now, once again, I am taking into account the Larry Bird and Dominique showdown, but that was pretty much a fourth quarter duel. Larry Bird did not get it going until he put in 20 points in the fourth quarter. To me, LeBron versus Pierce was much, much more exciting because that was an entire game. And the fact that LeBron was able to bounce back from such pathetic showings within that series was beyond impressive. That's the resolve we wanted to see as fans, and he was universally regarded as either the best in the game or second behind only Kobe. The high praise meant high expectations, and we saw capitulation after capitulation from James against far inferior teams, such as the 2009 Orlando Magic, the 2010 Boston Celtics, and the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. It was a far cry from his earliest playoff standard that he had set for himself. And most great players, well, they take time to develop into big-time performances. LeBron seemed to be going in the opposite direction, and Miami found themselves in a similar predicament against the Pacers in the conference semifinals of 2012. The Pacers, massive underdogs, they were up 2-1 and also up at halftime and on the verge, really, of going up 3-1 before LeBron and Wade, of course, took over the game. LeBron finished with 40 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. It was one of the most impressive performances I've seen. We didn't see excuses. We didn't see passive-aggressive comments. We didn't see a bandage around his hand after the game. We saw a player that was pushed up against the wall and found a way to fight his way out. Same thing happened in the next series up against Boston. The Heat were up 2-0 before the Celtics ran off 3 straight wins. Game 6 was in Boston, with the Celtics on the verge of getting back to the finals and eliminating LeBron again. LeBron was getting killed by the media, but he responded with 45 points on 19 of 26 shooting, 15 rebounds, 5 assists. This is all in Boston, by the way, and he was able to lead his team to a Game 7, which they won. Then, of course, we have to move ahead a little bit, and that's the 2015 and the 2016 finals. The 2015 finals were especially impressive to me, as I've been on record to say that you could give me any NBA legend, from Jordan to Bird to Magic to Wilt to Shaq to whoever, and I'm still not convinced that they could have turned that Cavs team, who were without both Love and Irving. Well, Irving was there for Game 1, but beyond Game 1. And they had the likes of Tristan Thompson, Mozgov, Dellavedova, J.R. Smith in the starting lineup. And he turned them into legitimate competition against Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. Did LeBron shoot poorly? Sure. But he was incredible in just keeping them in the games. And 2016, what can I say? The first 4 games were forgettable. But the run he had in Games 5, 6, and 7 was jaw-dropping. Game 5, he had 41 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, and that was in Golden State. Game 6, once again, another elimination game. 41 points, 11 assists, 8 rebounds, 4 steals, 3 blocks. Game 7, back in Golden State. He had 27 points, 11 rebounds, 11 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks. And you may remember just one of those blocks. The point that's being made here is he's clearly one of the all-time greats. Now, is there frustration? Sure, because far too many times we've seen him not just come up short, but the excuses and the justifications are insulting. Just own it. Make amends instead of making those excuses. Also, despite all those accomplishments, he still seems awfully sensitive to any disagreement or criticism. He is almost a politician in his manner and his speech, which is once again insulting because it's so obvious in the manipulation. But as I was saying, the frustration is there because we've seen a great player who had the potential, and I mean genuine potential. I'm not talking about somebody who's saying, well, anyone can be anything. He had genuine, realistic potential to be the best player of all time, but more comfortable in stuffing the stat sheet than getting results. When he did focus in, he was unstoppable, and I mean truly unstoppable. Just like Jordan, just like Shaq. That's really the list of players he's on in terms of being able to dominate a game and the opposing team being essentially helpless to counter it. But for all his flaws, he is still a top 10 player of all time. That being said, he also hasn't elevated the game to a new standard, just like we saw Wilt and Russell do in the 60s, or Magic and Bird, they did in the 80s, or Jordan, he did in the 90s. But he has been great, despite relatively, of course, underachieving. Now, it may sound like I'm taking shots at him at times during this answering this question, but this leads us up to a much more serious topic. What is LeBron's legacy in the NBA? There are so many legitimate ways to answer this question. Firstly, allow me to define legacy and how it is applied amongst most sports fans. The dictionary definition, is a gift or bequest that is handed down, endowed, or conveyed from one person to another. Now, of course, that is the dictionary definition of the word. How sports fans apply this word, legacy, is simply how your career is defined when looking back. Bill Russell's is winning. Wilt Chamberlain's is stats and records. Kareem's is longevity. Larry Bird's is skill and intelligence. Magic Johnson's is versatility. Jordan's, for lack of a better explanation, is the highest standard of everything. So what is LeBron's? Is it his finals appearances, or is it his finals losses? Is it the way that he's embraced free agency? Is it how poorly his teams have performed once he does leave? Or is it his statistical accomplishment, which he is on track to annihilate? Or is it his longevity as well? Let's begin with his streak to the finals, and with it, his finals record. It's impossible to focus in on one and not the other, so we're going to do both at the same time. There is no question that making the finals 8 straight seasons is one of the most impressive feats in league history. But a lot of context needs to be applied. There is talk that you could put LeBron on any team in the East and then make the finals. So let's dig a little deeper. From 2003, which is his rookie year, up until 2010, which is when he left Cleveland, James made the finals one time, 2007, which, along with 2002, is considered the worst the conference has ever been. Apart from that year, he made the conference finals once in 2009 and the conference semifinals 3 times, 2006, 2008, and 2010. Then, once he joined up with Wade and Bosch, he's never not made the finals. Boy, that was a weird way of saying he's always made the finals, but anyway. But the point that I'm trying to make here is he's always had at least 2 All-Stars alongside him, with the exception of last season, and has always been the favorite, despite rarely having home court in the conference finals. Of course, I'm talking about being a favorite in the Eastern Conference. Now, does this discount the streak? No, but let's not engage in hyperbole and say you can put him with anyone, because that's clearly not the case either. The other counter that needs to be addressed is how weak the conference has been. Since this streak has begun, his teams are 3 out of 8 in the finals. How is it? Please answer me this question. How is it that a team can be so dominant in getting to the finals and then fall flat on their faces so emphatically when they face the competition from the West? The only explanation is the West is that much better. And the interesting thing in all of this, as bad as the 3 out of the 8 record is it doesn't do it justice. 2 of LeBron's wins came in 7-game series, which is a good indication of how close he was losing both times. In fact, in those 2 wins that came in 7 games, he had to survive an unbelievable 5 elimination games. He could very easily be 1 out of 8 in the NBA Final. And beyond that, there have been multiple times where he was either swept or taken out in 5 games. Those aren't close losses. Those are significant beatdowns. Another common theme with LeBron is that his teams are simply overmatched by talented teams in the finals. Firstly, we never gave this excuse to anybody before, or at least not on this level. We never gave Larry Bird the excuse when he lost to the Lakers in 85, or Magic when they were trounced by the Sixers in 83, or Jordan when he lost to the Pistons, who had 3 Hall of Fame players, or the Celtics, who boasted 5 Hall of Fame players as well. How about Shaq, when he was routinely shown the door by the Jazz or the Spurs? We didn't give him the excuse then. And the sad thing is, this excuse opens up all kinds of inconsistencies. Firstly, in 2007 and 2011, LeBron's teams had higher conference seedings than the team they played in the NBA Finals. So we either acknowledge that there's a huge difference in standards of play between the conferences, and LeBron enjoyed and feasted on a weaker Eastern Conference, or they were of similar standards and there is no excuse for losing. It can't be both. The other point is, while yes, LeBron has faced some loaded teams, but he too was on loaded teams himself. The Miami Heat and the second go-around Cavs were super teams with a minimum of 3 All-Stars or future Hall of Famers. It wasn't until Durant arrived in Golden State that there was a team that was significantly better than the one that he was on, at least on paper. Of course, I'm excluding the one that just made the finals as well, by the way. So don't send me a message like, oh, what about this year? Well, I'm acknowledging this year was different. Also, whilst we're talking about Kevin Durant and the Golden State Warriors, it should be noted that LeBron has only won 1 game in the 2 series against the Warriors with Durant, which is a winning percentage of 11%. Now, the point that I'm making here is, yes, whilst you can point to Jordan losing to the Celtics or the Pistons, have we ever seen him have a winning percentage of 11% up against one team? No, we haven't. That needs to be addressed. His team has not even been competitive with Durant and the Warriors. But let's get back to LeBron and the discussion about him facing superior teams in the finals. Now, before Miami and the super teams, yes, he did get to the finals once. And yes, that 2007 Cavs team was garbage offensively outside of James. But as I've mentioned before, that entire conference was beyond weak. The Cavs, despite how people want to look back at that finals run now, people that want to romanticize that run, they forget that heading into the playoffs, Cleveland was favored to make the finals. And after that run, they never made it back. If he was consistently getting to the finals with that team and going through the big 3 Celtics and going through Dwight Howard and the Orlando Magic, then sure, I could look past it. But they were losing to Dwight Howard and the Magic. They lost to the Celtics when they became Rajon Rondo's team. They weren't the big 3 anymore. The big 3 were essentially role players. That was Rondo's team. And they embarrassed them so bad that everyone accused LeBron of quitting. That's how badly they made him look on the court. So yes, I'm going to say it. The 2007 Cavs team, they're wildly overrated, and it was a fluke. How about free agency? This one is interesting. But let's not forget that Shaq signed with LA just as he was about to enter his prime. So LeBron is far from a trailblazer in this field. And if that's his lasting legacy, his free agent movements, is that a good one when you consider the controversy and the backlash that involved the decision? The other point that is made is how poorly his teams are after he leaves. But that really shouldn't surprise anyone that watches the game or has played the game. LeBron, for all his talent, he plays one way, and he forces teams to surround him with shooters. Even all-stars, such as Chris Bosh and Kevin Love, are reduced to catch and shoot guys, because that benefits LeBron's style of play much better. So what happens to the team when the engine is essentially taken out, but the transmission and the wheels and the brakes that rely on the engine, they're still there? The car doesn't go. The same thing happens to the old franchises that LeBron was a part of. It will be very interesting to see how the Cavs do this season, running their offense through Love and having a real system in place. And then there are stats. The totals that he is going to finish with, barring a horrific injury that cuts his career short, but the totals that he will finish with are going to be incredible. But that has much more to do with his longevity than his prime. And this would be the best way for him to be remembered. Unfortunately for him, it instantly disqualifies him for the GOAT argument because of players like Wilt, players like Oscar Robertson, and even potentially Russell Westbrook. They all post much better stats than him. So now that I've debunked some myths that people would love for his legacy to be, let's get back to the original question of what it actually is. I tend to think his legacy will be one of statistical awe along with team success underachieving. The problem with all these myths that I pointed out is it creates an illusion of LeBron being better than he truly is. Then when these myths are debunked, there is a feeling of underachievement because he could have, and he should have, accomplished more from a winning standpoint. Going 2 from 4 in the finals with by far the best team in basketball, and maybe the most talented, up until that point at least, is not acceptable. And those two losses, one was by a record margin by an old Spurs team. Duncan was 37, Parker and Ginobili were in their mid-30s, and Kawhi Leonard was not even an all-star at that point. And the other loss was to the Mavs, who had one all-star and a bunch of players that were discarded by other clubs, such as Shaw Marion, Peja, Deshaun Stevenson. They had some other talent too. They had Jason Terry and Tyson Chandler, but no one was taking them serious. In fact, they had the legacy of being chokers prior to that playoff run. Now, the 2015 loss, I can excuse that. The 2016 win was an incredible moment. The 2017 and the 2018 finals were damning in LeBron's lack of desire to play any type of defense. Had he not had those moments and stepped up like we saw him accept the challenge in 2016 or in 2012, then maybe, just maybe, we'd have a legacy fitting of a player who can be considered the greatest of all time. Instead, we have excuses and the lowering of standards for what the standard of the greatest player of all time discussion is. And if that's the case, that the standard has been lowered, then that's maybe the worst possible legacy you can leave a sport. You always want to improve whatever it is you're a part of, whether it's a sport or a business or a family or a society. And maybe once the dust settles on his career, we'll notice how the media and his fans have enabled him to not reach his potential. And unfortunately, I think I'm sort of leaning towards that being his legacy. It's unfortunate because he's still a top 10 player of all time. Without a shadow of a doubt, he's a top 10 player of all time. But quite honestly, he should have been a lock for the Mount Rushmore. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. This is a shorter podcast. It's more of a rambling and a rant than anything. But I hope you enjoyed it. We've got another episode coming up this week, which will be the power rankings leading into the NBA season starting. We've already done a season preview, but we'll rank the teams without the conferences. 1 through 10 or 1 through 12 maybe. I'm not going to do the 1 through 30. And I'll open up the mailbag and we'll have some shorter responses hopefully. But thank you so much for listening and I'll catch you next time.